Settle down. Good afternoon. So we're changing the afternoon a little bit based on our lived experience here together. This program is what you've all been waiting for because we're going to talk about God. So at this program, we're going to talk about God. We're going to take a soul snack at 3:15 in an hour or so, take a little bit of a break. There'll be coffee. And then we're going to come back in here for questions and answers because I know you've all been storing up your questions for Dr. Hoffman. And we're going to need 24 hours for that, but we don't have it. And then we will conclude in the courtyard together by 4:30. So here you go.
Thank you. Yeah, so originally we had planned another lecture at the end of the day, and I promised it to you last night, but now you're going to have to invite me back, so there. All right, thank you. This is really I've been talking to you, but now you're going to have to talk to me. Here's what wait, they're still moving some chairs in. People are sitting down. So I'll give it just a minute till everybody's here. Pardon me? All right. So naturally, I got a story first. So I've been very fortunate in my life in very many ways. One is that I graduated from the Hebrew Union College with my PhD in liturgy before Jews knew what liturgy meant. And so I had to learn what it was myself. When I went to school, I was taught that it was the history of prayers, which, as you saw from our little look at Adon Olam, is not uninteresting. But as you also heard, I'm really more interested in worship and in how prayer becomes prayer to us, not just something on the page. Remember, it's not a prayer book. It's a script, right? So I joined this organization. I gave a lecture at Notre Dame, and I joined this organization of Christians and me. It was, well, that's a good title for a book, isn't it? Anyway, it was called... These were the leading Christians, Catholics, Protestants, not all churches, but churches that had a liturgy, like Episcopalians, Lutherans, not so much free church people who don't really have a liturgy and make it up each Sunday. And so they were trying to figure out what would worship look like for modern people. And so I was trying to figure out the same thing. So we've spent years and years trying to figure it out. In the process of it, I made some very wonderful friends. One of them especially, who taught at Notre Dame. He'd been a priest. He'd left the priesthood. And then eventually he'd gotten married, and he had 2 children. And we just had this wonderful appreciation of one another, So he had a practice that he did, and he told me about it. And this is what he did. He went to church on Sunday morning, many different churches. And after Mass, after their worship, he then would gather people together like this. It's in a smaller group than this. He'd have like just a focus group, And so we'll have to pretend we're a little focus group here. And then he said to them, is there any moment in your life that you would be willing to call the presence of God? Now, this was, I'm guessing, in the early 1980s or something like that. Way back then, he's doing this. How many Christians, do you think, Catholics, said, yes, there's a moment in my life that I would call the presence of God? What percentage do you figure? Close to 100, yes, pretty much everybody. So I thought, this is interesting. I will try this experiment. You already know the end of the story, right? So I tell my students in class, they've taken this elective with me, and I say, listen, here's what we're going to do. For your assignment this week, you all have student pulpits. When you go to your student pulpit, you gather the people together. Usually it was a small pulpit because students would serve small places, around the country who couldn't afford a full-time rabbi. And so when you go to your pulpit, instead of a sermon this Friday night, you put them together in a little room. In fact, that's all you have is a little room. And they're already a focus group because there aren't many people. And you ask them, is there a moment in your life that you would say is the presence of God? How many Jews said yes? 10? Do I hear 10? Do I hear 8? Sold for 5. Nobody, practically nobody, maybe a 1-2 person. I mean, I don't know. The students come back on Monday, they're just livid. And they say to me, that's the worst assignment we've ever had. The people are waiting for a sermon. Instead, we get together. We say, we're going to have a conversation about God. That's over with in 10 seconds. And now they look at us like, what am I supposed to do now? I had nothing else prepared. So I thought about that. I said to myself, well, in fact, I told them. I said, what can we learn from this? One thing we could conclude, I suppose, is that God is only in the lives of Catholics. That's a possibility. But more likely, we asked the wrong question, right? So let's go back and ask them. They're already looking. Oh, no, don't tell me. But yeah, I said, well, go back. This time will be better. Ask them, is there a moment in your life that you would define as spiritual? So now it's 1980, same time. How many Jews said, oh, yeah, there's a moment in my life that I would define as spiritual? What percentage? Some of you are right. I don't know what you all said, but it's a little better, but not a lot. Remember I said the first time we talked, when I first gave my talk here about 3 weeks ago, remember I said that Jews didn't come to spirituality easily. So we hadn't yet discovered it. And so it was maybe, 12% or something. So they come back, they say, all right, this is not funny anymore. Once again, it was a terrible thing, and the students say that the congregations are wondering why they hired them and all that sort of thing. And so I said, okay, one more time. Now they're thinking to themselves, I should never have taken this course. I knew it was a mistake. I say, blame me. You tell them you have this crazy professor and you have to do it. You're really sorry, but ask them, is there a moment in their life which was profound? And now, of course, 95, 100% say, oh, of course, profound, yes. Now, the second part of the exercise was to ask them to share the moment that was profound. And the thing is, what the Jews shared as being profound is exactly what the Catholics shared as being the presence of God. So much depends then on what language we're prepared to use for universal human experiences that we all have. And by listening to different experiences, therefore, we can learn about profundity and about spirituality and about the presence of God, depending on how we look at it. So we're going to start our conversation about God with a question to you, and it'll depend on you to be willing to share some things. Now, this is not therapy. Please understand, I'm not asking for the deepest, darkest secrets that happen to you, but there are experiences that we all have where if you think back, you would say, that was the presence of God. Or you would say, that was really spiritual. Or you would say, that was profound. By and large, these are not things that you plan. These are things that happen. Maybe an event was planned, but during that event, something happened, right? So I want you to think for just a minute, all right? I wish we could move the chairs around. I'd have you talk to one another, but that's already too hard, I think, too many people in the room. So we'll just ask you to share out loud. You don't have to, but I'd love to hear some of these experiences. And so take a minute and think. And we'll we'll pass around a microphone or something, give you a moment. When you describe it, however, here's the rule. I don't want to hear generalities. People usually say, oh, whenever I go, I'm hiking and I'm in the mountains. It may be that you had such a, tell me when you went hiking, what the mountain was, and at that moment in time. I remember I was 25 and there was Mount Kilimanjaro and I, whatever, and I want to hear exactly the moment. Similarly, people are going to say music. That could be, but don't say whenever I go to the symphony or, gee, I love music. There was a time when you heard one particular performance and this is what happened to me. So very, very specific, please. Okay, give some thought to it. All the extroverts, I will have the hand in the air already, but I'm going to wait so everyone gets a chance because I want you to listen to each other. Just think for a minute. How you doing? Good. Okay, so we'll start this side of the room. Yes.
I went to the cemetery. I went to the cemetery to visit the graves of my mother and my father and my uncle. Oh, are you guys there? Well, it's been great being with you. I leave the cemetery, I turn on the radio. It's the Brahms viola songs. My mother was a singer, and that was her signature piece. And then they played right after that the Mozart Clarinet Concerto, and that was the present that my uncle had given me that I memorized the record. And so, yes, there was divine intervention, I thought, there.
You want to call it God? Yeah? Okay.
Definitely.
Good. Somebody else?
The first time that I walked into the hotel and touched the wall. The first time I put my hands fully on the wall and embraced it and prayed. It was just awesome. My heart was racing. I was looking at the wall and just thinking about my life and, you know, who had come before me and who had touched this wall and, you know, the thousands of years, and it's very powerful.
So I'm going to ask, Gail's got a pen and pencil. Can you keep track of what people say? And then as they describe it, just a line or two of what they say. Later on, we'll look back and we'll see what we can learn from them all, okay? Was that a profound, spiritual presence of God? Profound. Okay. Get to the other side.
In 1986, I had an opportunity to visit refuseniks in the Soviet Union and had an opportunity to be involved in helping release one of the Soviet Jewish prisoners from the Gulag. 2 years later, Kathy and I were in Jerusalem, and he walked down the street with his pregnant wife. To me, that was a God moment. Overwhelmed, proud that I could play a role, humble, and I just did a thank God.
And is that the presence of God, spiritual or profound? Okay. Let's go to the back of the room.
Here, I've got a microphone. If you're picking me.
Yeah. By the way,
All right.
I don't see all that well, so sometimes I don't see a hand, and if I'm ignoring you, I don't mean to. I'm sorry. Also, I don't say to my right eye altogether, so you folks are in trouble. But I will get to you. Yeah.
So I had two.
What's your
and it
name?
happened
Why don't we use names? Because I don't know you.
I'm David Berezin. My wife
Thank
Angie
you.
over here. I had two, and they both happened to be really Jewish. But my first one
Speak
was
right into the microphone.
my first one was by bar mitzvah. I had a stuttering problem. It was really severe when I was 9, 10, 11 years old. And when I did my bar mitzvah training, I had to read a speech. And when I read, that's when it was really bad. I couldn't get words out without stuttering terribly. And so I practiced in front of the mirror, and it was terrible. And I was just so, all my friends were going to be there, and I didn't want to even get up in the morning. That was the worst morning. I got there, and I get up in front of everyone, and I don't understand what happened, but everything came out perfectly. I didn't stutter at all. And I still don't understand exactly what that was about. That was one. The other one was quicker. I was in high school in Israel through the Alexander Musk program. And we were near the border of Lebanon, or the northern border. And there was a base camp there, and we stayed overnight. And in the day, I went for a jog, because I like to run. And this dog that was at the camp followed me. We just went out into the mountains. I didn't know where I was or where I was going. And I got lost. And I'm figuring, I'm in the middle of nowhere near the border. I could be in another country. I don't even know what's going on. And I just felt like a presence of some kind to continue in that general direction. And so I did, and I think the dog helped. But maybe the dog knew. But anyway, I got home. But that moment, I always felt like that was a spiritual, profound moment where I was lost, and then all of a sudden I was okay, you know.
And how did you, can you describe your feelings a little bit, a few words you felt?
Both of those moments, I felt a sense of calm. Calm and yeah, serenity and
Serenity?
belonging.
Belonging.
I mean, I was terrified for a second because I was lost in the second one. The first one, I was terrified all morning. And in both cases...
We do that for bar mitzvahs, yeah.
Yeah. And in both cases, I felt just a calming sense of belonging.
Yeah. Let's keep track of the feelings, because they will say something to us later on. Thank you. Thank you. But just before you, who went? Yeah, so I asked you, I said, is it God, spiritual, or profound? You said all three. Would you like to choose one? If you had to? Okay. Okay, let's start way over there in the corner. Just to prove you. I got it. Yeah, way over here. I can't see who you are. I can't see that far, I'm sorry, but I see a hand waving against...
My name's Monica.
Monica.
After my grandpa's funeral, we were coming from Boca to Miami, I believe it was, yes. And I was in the car with my cousin, and on my computer screen in my car, it popped up that I had an incoming text message from my grandpa. And he used to text me or call me all the time and tell me not to text and drive. And in the moment, I was texting and I was driving, and I get an incoming message from my grandpa's cell phone. And I freaked out, and I pushed the button so I could see the message, and it would never let me see it, but it would pop up repeatedly. And his phone wasn't on, obviously, but it popped up for quite some time, and I thought that was like a God moment. And it would come up on my screen, and I never wanted to give up that car or my phone, because I didn't know if it was the car, the phone, or God, but I thought it was a God moment. And I'm a very not a great driver, and he knew that. So I always just felt like that was very grounding, and to me that was a God moment, and it just made me feel loved and comforted. And that's like a lot of the God moments that I have. That's the feeling that I get.
So it's loved and comforted.
Yes.
Thank you. Let's go to someone in the back there again.
Hi. Gentleman over was stuttering. I used to stammer. And when I came to this country, English wasn't very easy for me. So I won't give you an example of stammering, but that's an example. So I was talking to some people before came to this country, to make a long story short, and came with my brother. My parents came after, and then, but about a month or two, I got appendicitis, and my appendix broke, and all it was in the morning. So in the evening, I was almost dead. They took me to back then it was Variety Children's Hospital, and they actually saved my life. It's now Nicholas Children's Hospital, but I'm so indebted to all these things happening and parents. But one thing that in Cuba, you're a kid, they took the temperature with a thermometer, put it on your arm here. But I learned something in the United States. When you're a kid, they put the thermometer someplace else. And then I thought, I pleaded. So why was it? Could you please, can you have them tell, put it, not there, put it, so they had a talk with the nurse, and finally they put the thermometer in my mouth. But then I thought, oh my God. Yeah, did they clean it? But yeah, a blessed moment at that time from the start, knowing that I was almost died and they saved my life. So it's very spiritual.
Okay. Move it around. Someone in the back, someone in the front.
Racel. I have a lot of profound moments where, in fact, it felt like God wasn't. About one where God was there. And I would say that I was a little kid in a real nice place for Jewish girls named Santa Maria, California. And we had a student rabbi from HUC. And it was 1967, and the war of the Six-Day War started. And when you're in Santa Maria, California, where there are no Jews, no one cared. Some of them didn't even know a war was going on. And my mother and father packed all 4 of us kids down to drive down to LA for about 4 hours. And the place we went to was Hollywood Bowl. And there was a bowl full of Jews. And Barbra Streisand is singing Hatikva. And we're all standing, we're all crying together. And that was the first real congregation of Jews crying together, thinking about what would happen, the fate of Israel. And definitely God was present for me as an 11-year-old child. And from then on, those are those congregational moments that are so special to me.
And well, how are you going to define that moment? Was that profound? Was it God? Was it
it was deeply spiritual.
Deeply
obviously
spiritual.
Proud, but profound and proud. But there was no question that God was present with us.
Yeah?
There was
Okay.
no question.
Okay, let's move up to the front here. People are waiting. Actually, I got my
So I'm Marta, and this was some years ago at the Minion service. Natalie, we've been trying to get this meditation group going for years, and we had led meditation at 8:25 that morning before Torah study, which was not a particularly desirable time, but it was lovely, and Natalie's laughing. And we'd come to services then after Torah study together, and at that point the Minion was quite small, and everybody chanted, and the music was just overwhelming. And Rabbi Pomerantz was leading services. This was during the time when we were in the search for the new head rabbi. And I was on the search committee. And now, of course, it seems perfectly clear we should have just given her the job. But at the time, there was, some thought about, should we look for another candidate? And I kept saying, we need to remember that not only do we need to offer her the job, she needs to accept it, and we need to be aware that everything we do and every way we treat her will factor into that, knowing she was a hot commodity and being courted by a number. And we were at services. She was leading the services. I was sitting next to Natalie. The music was beautiful. And I had this sense of incredible fragility. This moment in time, this might be like the last moment in time of being together with these friends in this place. And then the clouds parted, the sun came through there. And I was just struck by how beautiful and how transitory it was. And to me, that is a God moment, and I just want to give people a word, if you choose to use it, which does not come from any religious entity. It's called a God shot. And it's just the heavens open, and there is an opening, and you can just feel the connection. And thank God. We offered her the job, and she said yes.
I think that's when we're supposed to drop the mic, right? But I was a third-year medical student at a time when you're very aware that you know nothing and can help no one in any way. And a beautiful little 3-year-old came in with a new diagnosis of leukemia, quite complicated, where she was seizing and we couldn't stop her seizures. It's something called status epilepticus. And we had to put her in a pharmacologic-induced coma to calm the brain down while we figured out other things. And I keep saying we, but the truth is I was doing nothing but following this. She came in the morning, and her mom was alone. I don't remember why, but I sat with her overnight. I actually thought of this story when you were talking last night about being with people and through people, and it was a time when it was clarifying for me that not everything that I would do in medicine was about curing as much as one wants that, but it's sometimes just about healing can be being with. And that has stayed with me forever, and I think doesn't just color who I am as a physician, but who I am as a person. Anticipating the question, I would say, yes, it was God, but it was God through sort of a humanism kind of experience for me.
And at the time, what were you think? What feeling was associated with it?
It was very calm. It's rare that I have such a sense of this is exactly where I should be at this point in time. And that I was, without doing anything, without really doing, I was doing something, and that was enough.
Okay, let's take just a couple more. I don't know, let's go ahead. Microphone's there. Go ahead.
This was in 1998. My mom had just died, and my sister, my father, and I were sitting Shiva. So the Shiva was over, and I had gone to a bookstore. My hair is standing on edge just telling the story. And I found this book called, it was either Talking to God or Talking to Heaven. And I brought the book home, and at the back of the book, there were these exercises that one could do to find out if the person's spirit was still there. She had died about a week ago. And so the exercise that I chose was, Mom, if you're still here, I want you to flicker the lights. And you had to do it for 3 nights in a row. So I do it the first night, the second. I don't tell my father or my sister at all. I'm sleeping in the living room. They're in the back bedrooms. And then on the 3rd day, my dad comes out and he says, we've been in the house for too long. Let's go out for a walk. And we come out. My dad is getting ready to lock the door, and he says, hey, do we need anything? My sister comes out of the bedroom, and she goes, we need light bulbs. I went, why do we need light bulbs? And she says, the light bulbs are flickering in the bedroom. I went, I'm shaking just telling the story. I go in the bedroom, and sure enough, the lights, and they're like, what's that, Meryl? What's that about? And I told them the story about what it was, that it's Mom. And they're like, nah. I said, I'm telling you, it's Mom. She's here. She's still here. So it was spiritual. It was profound. And for me, it gave me a love connection with my mom, that she was still around.
Wow. Okay. I don't know. Where are we? Hand the microphone. Someone.
Hi. This is a story about 3 people sitting in a like and suspicious about whether or not there really was a God. One was a girlfriend of mine and her teenage daughter, which was impossible to communicate with her. She wouldn't talk, as many teenagers are like that when they're with adults. We're at the breakfast table, and so I'm thinking, what can I do to engage this teenage girl? And I'm thinking, oh, I got it. So if you could ask God any question at all, anything at all, what would you ask him? I got her engaged. And, the mother said, how did 6 million people die in the Holocaust? The girl said, how did children get sick and die or get raped and killed? How is that possible that things like that could happen? And I don't particularly remember what question I asked them. We leave breakfast. 5 minutes driving down the road, and there's a fair. We pull over at the fair. There's a table full of books from an old library. It's a block wall, this this book full of books. We're walking past it in order to get into the fair, and I just glanced down. I'm not a book guy really, but I just glanced down thousands of books, and I just stopped and I said, "You guys are not going to believe this. It is impossible." I reach out and I show them the book. It says, "If you could ask God anything at all, what would you ask him?" The answers. So I've
How
checked
did
in
you,
with those.
so is there a feeling tone connected with that?
It was so beyond belief. Even now, from time to time, when years go by, I
All
call
right.
them on the phone to see if that really happens, because it was just so beyond. It had to be God.
Yeah.
It had to be God.
I wish you bought the book. I'd love the answers.
The book
yeah.
exists. I
So
did
all
check
right,
it.
let's
It's
go
on,
back to with Gail. Let's see where we are. Okay. So I want you to just quick. What was the experience, and what were the feeling tones connected to it? Now, what you're all going to do is you're going to think about these, and you're going to see if we can make them into categories. What categories do people associate God with? When does it happen? And what do people feel like when it happens? Obviously, there's a broad range, but see if there's any similarities that you can pick up in any of this stuff. If we went on and on, we'd get a lot more, but will be a sample.
So we had Adele who talked about the cemetery and Brahms concerto, and she called it divine intervention. That was before you were asking other kinds of questions. Then Karen Revo spoke about the first time her hand was on the kotel, and it was profound. Larry Hurwitz talked about visiting the former Soviet Union, helping to free a refusenik, and seeing him years later walking in Jerusalem. And that was all of the above for him, but you made him choose one, and he chose God. David talked about his bar mitzvah and his stuttering challenge, and then he did it perfectly at his bar mitzvah, and then also talked about the jog near the border of Lebanon where he got lost, and the dog may have helped to show him the way back, and he felt a sense of calm, serenity, belonging.
Calm, serenity, belonging.
And by the way, what's dog spelled backwards, David?
Okay.
Okay, then Monica talked about after her grandpa Mort's funeral, and she got a text from her grandfather while she was driving, and she felt loved and comforted.
Comfort and love.
Marco talked about coming to the United States and having his appendix burst, and he almost died, but they saved his life at the Children's Hospital, and that was a spiritual experience for him. Rossell spoke about the Six-Day War when she left Santa Maria, California, drove to LA, and heard Barbara Streisand singing Hatikva, and that was deeply spiritual. Marta talked about the meditation. No. Marta spoke about the meditation before Torah study and kind of she didn't use this word, but I'll say synchronicity of everything happening beautifully that morning, that moment of fragility, transitory, and she thought it was a God-shot moment. Judy Schechter spoke about being a third-year medical student and having to treat a 3-year-old with leukemia who they had to put in a coma, and she sat with the child overnight. I'm not sure if you use this word, Judy, but I wrote it down that you seemed to have this moment of clarity when you were sitting here with that child, and you felt that you asked if that was God, and she said God through human encounter. Marilyn talked about her mom dying, sitting Shiva, then going to a bookstore, and the whole flickering of the lights, and then her sister saying we need light bulbs, and she said it was a spiritual experience and manifest a love connection to her mom. Keith talked about the breakfast nook and the teenage girl who he tried to engage, and he said if you could ask God anything, what would you ask? And then they found this book, this fair with a table full of books, with a book called That His Eyes Just Glanced Upon, If You Could Ask God Anything, the Answers. And he said it felt like God.
Okay, so what can you conclude from all of this? Anybody think of any lessons? Yeah.
Okay. I felt that the commonality here is that there's a moment of pressure, of stress, of feeling inadequate, of overcoming a tragedy of some kind, and that is being able to do that was the common thread.
A moment of stress, overcoming that moment. Yeah, I see someone in the back. I'll give you your exercise, yeah.
Can everyone hear me there? Okay.
Yeah, talk right into the mic and they'll hear you better.
I sensed with heart and mind, even as everyone was talking, a sense of expansiveness.
Oh.
Very acute expansiveness.
Expansiveness, good, very interesting. Someone way over there, yeah?
Some of the themes I just felt like in times of crisis, like was spoken, like God brings us peace. So those God moments just brought
Times
us
of crisis, God gives us peace. So we've got expansiveness, overcoming adversity, and you called it, okay. Talk a little more. What do you mean by connection?
Many of the moments people were describing where they felt connected to other people living or in some cases
yes,
deceased, and also connection to a larger
connection to something large.
Larger, like the Jewish people.
Right, yeah, the Jewish people. That's a good example.
Right.
Yeah.
Something bigger than you or us in the moment that's not based on a factual experience.
Any other observations?
I think that a common element of this is the observer and the reflection that the observer brings to the wide range of human experiences.
Okay. It's a reflective kind of thing, absolutely.
I think it's perhaps the ability to allow oneself to be extraordinarily vulnerable at a given moment and then allow that person to perhaps be open to a greater whatever.
So vulnerability, let's stop at that one for a minute because that word comes up a lot. What do you mean by vulnerable?
Well, I personally have had many experiences. I didn't share them, but
You
I
can
don't
share it
necessarily.
if you like. I mean, go ahead.
But I don't know that it has, for me personally, I don't know that it had to be a time of stress and particular distress.
Yeah.
It could be just, I mean, there's so many times with music or with nature or just sitting in some situation and allowing myself to be, maybe it's open and vulnerable.
Open, to be open, yeah. Because vulnerable can mean several things. Vulnerable can be, gee, I could get hurt here, right? Yeah, so you mean it in the sense of expansiveness. Normally we're not that open. Usually we're guarded. Yeah, we're guarded. We enclose, and guarded doesn't just mean guarded from harm. You know, guarded sometimes as I don't want to go there with my head. I don't want to think about that. That's a little dangerous. I don't want, you know. So vulnerable in this sense is it goes, pardon me? Yeah, willingness. It goes with expansiveness. Who said expansiveness, right? Someone did expansiveness. I remember somebody did anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, in listening to all of this, I think the beauty of it is God is everywhere, always. And as we're all created in his image and likeness, he presents himself to us in different ways at different times, sometimes when we're looking, sometimes when we're not looking, although, and I would say my first real godly moment, I certainly wasn't looking. I was in medical school and, you know, pretty confident, you know, and figured I could cure everyone and fix everything and know everything, and would see this Christian group of medical students going and feeling that it was important to bring God into medicine and thinking, well, that's really not part of medicine. I mean, we got to learn everything, you know. You can't just pray and heal everyone. And going into my first delivery, just, you know, as a medical student, reading how to deliver a baby, knowing what to do, and I can do this thing, and thank God I wasn't doing that delivery. And God just punched me in the face, and seeing this miracle of life coming out of another human being was probably the first real creation, godly moment of his magnificence that I certainly wasn't looking for, planning, expecting, perhaps needing. So I think the beauty of God is he is always there. And for some reason, as Gail even whispered, God, as Jews, I think we lost that joke as we were talking to earlier when you, so I think that it's, as we look, we will see him.
Okay. So that's an example of suddenly being open to what you weren't open to before. Just one or two more observations. We've got one over here, one over, I don't know where, but go ahead. Yeah. What do we learn from this, the commonality?
Well, first of all, I am really surprised that everybody has spoken and their feeling of being with God and God doing what they're saying, coming, has always been towards a tragedy or something unhappy and whatever.
So a lot of the stuff seems to be border on the tragic, the unhappy.
Yeah, I mean, to me...
Not the baby, mind you,
no,
but
well,
yeah.
Like, you know, my experience with God was very simple. My whole life, basically, I used to blame God for a lot of things that I was doing.
Speaking to the mic a little.
Yeah, I blamed God for a lot of things along. You know, I saw my best friends. Well, they made into business. They made a lot of money, or this one did that. And then I used to say, you know, God, you know, why not me? And then one day, this has only happened about several years ago, I was standing, and this is a true story, standing in the mirror shaving, and I took a look at myself, and I said, you know what? God didn't do these things. I did. And my feeling of relief and the fact that I felt I had like a guardian angel on my shoulder all these years. And that, to me, the feeling that I had there was absolutely unbelievable for me, at any rate. And it was good.
And would you say that was a profound moment?
Oh, definitely.
Was it a spiritual moment?
It was both. Absolutely.
Was it a God moment saying, hey, I didn't do that stuff?
No, that was me saying.
That was you saying it. Okay. All right. So maybe because of time, let me just draw together what we've got so far. First of all, I will call these limit moments. These are moments when we reach our human limit. It seems to me that we human beings get used to working in a certain parameter of space and time and thought. We know how to compute 2 and 2, you know. We know how to say, that's very pretty. We know how to say, we know how to appreciate something that's beautiful. We know how to do whatever we do, but within certain limits. Now, the limits expand. And as we get older and better at it, and we go to school more, and we school ourselves in whatever it is, art, let's say, we can appreciate art better, more, deeper. And mathematicians, they can do more than 2 plus 2. You know, they can even invent new kinds of mathematics. So the human mind is constantly expanding, and so is the human heart, our ability to appreciate and to love, let's say, and to reach out to others. But as human beings in a certain being the human, I did give you this expression, we have the human condition to deal with, which is our limits. Because ultimately, no matter how much we understand, we know how much we don't. No matter how much we experience, there's experiences that are beyond us. No matter how much we're used to knowing, hey, I can do this, I know how to be a doctor, all of a sudden something comes up and you didn't know and you were so surprised, and on and on and on. It seems to me that the experiences that people name as God moments are experiences when they hit that wall and they think, this is my limit, and yet there's a sense that you've gone beyond the limit. All of a sudden there's a glimpse of something that couldn't happen. We often experience it as a coincidence. Oh my God, the lights flickered. How is that possible? Oh my God, he's giving me a text exactly now when I'm in the car, exactly after he's died. How is all that possible? Whenever we hit those moments, if we're open to them, we can look at them and think that maybe we've crossed that boundary. We have the sense of the moreness. That's what human beings seek, the moreness. In a way, that's what spirituality is, the experience of more, beyond your wildest expectations. And then you integrate that into who you are, and you have a sense that you're sort of something much, much bigger. And you realize, oh my God, I said that automatically. I'm not punning, no pun. Oh my God, you say, there really is more to life. How is it that I can feel connected to someone who died? How is it that I can simply touch a wall and it's like all of Jewish history is floating before me and I know what it's like? How is it that I hear Barbara Streisand saying Hatikva, and oh my God, I now know what I'm part of this Jewish people. I think that our lives are filled with those things, but we don't always stop for them. And then the question is, what will we call them? That's the issue. The issue isn't, do you believe in God? Almost always, when you ask someone on the street, well, not in Miami, not I didn't mean it like that. Not when you ask someone in the street, when you ask you in the street. That's what I mean. Any one of us. Hey, do you believe in God? You say, well, I don't know exactly. Now, if you're trained in evangelical Christian society, of course you believe in God. Everybody does. You were taught to say yes. If you're Jewish, you were probably taught to say, I don't know. That's how we were taught. Our ancestors largely came from Eastern Europe where they'd given up on God. Or they were hyper-intellectual Germans who also could study God but didn't believe in God. Belief was never part of the Jewish scheme. You could be a very good Jew without worrying about belief in God. We never excommunicated anybody because they didn't believe in God. So it was easy for us to say no and simply to think about, well, there's other stuff. It's profound. I'll go along with profound. The question then is, are you willing to see God in those moments? So it all depends on what language you use. I give you an example. Something I wish I had known when I had teenagers. Too late for me. If too late for you, then pass it along to your kids when they have teenagers. So here's my thought experiment. It comes out of my own experience. I was a teenager in Kitchener, Ontario, Canada, crummy little town, and my school appointed me to represent my school with all the other schools of Ontario at a mock United Nations. So I went to a university. I'm 14 years old. Someone drives me, and we live in a dorm. I'd never been in a dorm before, away from home, and a whole bunch of other, maybe 15, a whole bunch of other 14, 15, 16-year-olds, I don't know. And we're all in this dorm, and I remember being in awe of it, being suddenly grown up. Wow. I mean, so I can remember we talked all night, these kids and I. It was just wonderful. So now I use that experience as a thought experiment. So now you're doing dishes at home, ordinary evening, and you're there with your partner washing, drying, and you notice your teenage daughter or son, we'll say son because it was my experience, teenage son is standing behind you. And this is strange. He's usually in his room doing something or other, playing games, video games. So you turn and you say, yes. And he says to you, I want to talk about the weekend I was on. Yes, tell me about the weekend. So he says, well, it was like totally awesome. I mean, it was like all of a sudden we were all there, and I'd never been like that before, and we were all there, and how long we talked and talked and talked. And we were in this dorm, and it was a wonderful experience, and 11 o'clock we were supposed to turn off the lights. We didn't turn off the lights, and so we talked all night. And when they came in to find us, we went out on the fire escape, and we kept on talking, and the next thing you know, it was morning in the light, and we talked all night long. It was like, wow, totally awesome, fabulous, wonderful. Now, what do you respond? One possibility is you could say, that's interesting. That's glad you enjoyed it. Well, that doesn't do it justice, right? Or you might say, well, you have a therapist appointment on Wednesday. You can talk to your therapist. I don't recommend that either. So what do you say? Now, here's what I would say now, looking back, knowing what I know now. I would say, yes, that's what I mean by the presence of God. Because that's what I do mean. This kid is suddenly alive, with connected to all these other people, discovering humanity, talking and talking, and discovering connections, and alive to what life really can be like. And I want the kid to walk away and say, oh, that's God. So I don't preach to people to believe in God. I rather interpret experience as to do it justice, just like before when I first talked, you say a blessing with the 93-year-old grandmother. To do it justice, I want to say that's the presence of God. I'll give you just one finish. Yeah, I better finish this up, right? I'll give you. There's so much I still want to say, but I won't. I'll give you one kind of philosophical idea. In the middle of the 20th century, last century, a little earlier actually, between World War I and World War II, it began. There was a philosopher by the name of Ludwig Wittgenstein. He's one of the great minds of the 20th century, though somewhat idiosyncratic, to say the least. His father had been Jewish, and his father didn't want Ludwig to be Jewish. He lived in Germany, and it was the 1920s, and he decided that he would convert Ludwig to Christianity. So the family mostly converted to Christianity. But Ludwig knew that he had Jewish blood in him. His father, who was a very wealthy German, he owned vast steel manufacturing, and he sent Ludwig to Germany, probably to learn the steel business in Birmingham. Ludwig was completely uninterested in the family business. Instead, he went to Cambridge University, where you could just go and listen to lectures if you wanted to. So he took in a lecture by none other than Bertrand Russell. And he had the chutzpah to ask a question. He'd never studied there. Russell went home and told his wife, this is the smartest question he's ever had. He wondered who that person was. Eventually, actually, this was, I've got my timing wrong. This was just before the First World War. The First World War breaks out. Wittgenstein has to go back to Germany because he's now on the other side. And he fights with the Germans against the British in the First World War, and he's captured and so on. And while he's in this DP camp, you know, he writes a book. And the book has to do with a kind of philosophy that said, if you can't see it or feel it or derive it from your seeing and experiencing, then it doesn't exist. So all this talk about God and ethics and all that stuff, that's just drivel. Doesn't mean a thing. Because you can't see ethics and you can't see God. And so this was a very prominent philosophy in the 19th century, late 1800s. And in fact, most of the people saying it were Jews. Ludwig Wittgenstein agreed with that, and he writes this book out of nowhere, and they find him in this camp, and they bring him back to Cambridge, and they read his book, and it's so intelligent, they decide to put him on the faculty as a full-time tenured professor. He didn't have a doctorate. But the great understatement of the year was, we believe that Mr. Wittgenstein's thesis is the equivalent of any thesis here. We should grant him a doctorate. And I imagine they said here, 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 which is very expressive for the British. So anyway, he makes his name. But here's the thing. If you read his book to the end, he's proven the only thing that you can say that makes sense is stuff you can see or feel or hear, what they call empirical studies. If you can't scientifically deal with it, then you can't talk about it because it makes no sense. It's drivel. Just don't bother talking about it. At the end of his book, he says, I think I have now discovered all the things that we can legitimately say. The only problem is that when all is said and done, it avoids the only stuff that matters. Anyone who's read my book, he says, will realize that it's like a ladder. And when you climb to the top of it, you should throw it away. Because the important things in life, he says, cannot be proven that way. The important things in life, he says, show themselves. Now that's what we've been describing all along. Things in our lives that show themselves. And then, who said we are vulnerable in the sense that we have to open ourselves to them. If you don't open yourselves to them, so you won't notice them. Or you'll say, poo-poo, nothing. But if you're really open when you hit these moments of vast love, vast care, gorgeous sunset, nature, all the things you've mentioned, coincidences beyond possibility, but they're not beyond possibility, they just happened. These are things that show themselves. I think of God not as something I can prove, but something that shows God's self to us. And I'm open to those moments. Do I believe in God when they're not being shown? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. I don't think it matters. But I'm open to God as a reality in my life. So I think spirituality, that's what this weekend is about. Spirituality really is about exploring the beyondness of ordinary human life. It's opening ourselves to these grand possibilities. Grand in the sense of nature, like the philosopher's God, remember in Adon Olam, but also grand in the sense that I can hold my daughter's hand and sing with her while she's going into surgery. Open to the possibility that I can sit at the foot of a bed and somebody can see maybe God in my eyes.